Hello, I'm John Champion. Welcome to my shop. In this session I'm going to show you how to lay out and cut dovetails. Dovetails can be found in many applications, but the two that are probably most common to you are the half blind, which you'll see very often on a drawer. Here you see the side of the joint, on the side of the drawer you see the dovetail joint, and the front drawer face would cover that. And the other type would be the through dovetail, where you see the joint on both sides. You might see this in a decorative box. The parts of the dovetail include the tails, which you see here, shaped like a fish tail, and the pins, which slide through the tails to make the joint. The size of these tails, the width of the tails, the width of the pins, even the slope of this tail is completely your choice. There's no standard for that. I will say today that what you commonly see are slopes that are maybe 7 to 11 degrees. And you'll hear that expressed as maybe 1 to 8 or 1 to 5 ratio of slope. There was a time where you might have seen slopes that are 20, 25 degrees. And in some cases of period furniture, you'd see tails that are very narrow and pins that are very thin. But again, the size and shape is whatever you want it to make. Let's look at some of the tools we're going to need today. To mark out the tails and the pins, I'm going to be using a pencil and a marking knife. You could do this all with a pencil, but I think the marking knife gives you some advantages. I'll show you that. We're going to need a marking gauge. That'll mark the baseline for the tails on both sides. We need a square to draw some lines down. You'll need something to mark the tails, and there are a couple ways you can do that. You can use one of these devices, which is preset to a 1 to 5 or 1 to 8 ratio. These are pretty common, and they're very useful. I use this to make all of these samples over here. I didn't realize until after I'd made them that mine is crooked. This one is adjustable, so if you have something with an adjustment on it, make sure it's square. Most people wouldn't notice it, but these are crooked joints. Today I'm going to use this bevel gauge to mark the slope of my tails. And I've set this to 1 to 5, and all you need to do that is take a ruler. This is a 1-inch wide ruler, set at 1 to 5, and I've got my 1 to 5 slope for that. We're going to use some dividers today to mark out the tails. I'll show you how to do that. You need a dovetail saw. This dovetail saw has a very stiff back, and mine has a very stiff blade. And I can cut really thick lumber with this, and I can cut it straight. This really does a great job of keeping it straight. This is another dovetail saw. Same sort of a stiff back, but this is a very thin and flimsy blade. I would not try to cut a thick piece of wood with this, but it's a great application for a small dovetail such as this. You'll need some chisels. I have a collection of chisels here, and I'll use 2 or 3 of these for our purposes. I'm also going to use this skew chisel that I have, and when you compare this to a regular chisel, it has a much narrower blade, and it also has a skew-shaped point, an angled point. And I'm going to use this to get deep into these corners where I want to get out the last of the waste. You can use a sharp knife and do the same thing, but I have this, so I'm going to use this today. You need some material. Today we're going to use a piece of cherry wood for the front of my little illustration, and I'm going to use a piece of poplar for the side. You can use any sort of wood. You can use softwoods, hardwoods, but you just have to be conscious if you're using pine, or frankly even a soft hardwood like poplar. You have to make sure your tools are very sharp, and you probably need to make more of a slicing motion with your chisel cuts because you'll crush the fibers in them. Harder woods like cherry and maple, they are much easier to carve. The first thing I want to do is mark the baseline on the sides of these. So I need to mark a baseline on the side, that's the thickness of the front, and a baseline on the front, that's the thickness of the side. If you notice on the side, I've got to mark all the way around because I'm cutting off the 2 half pins on the end. On the front, I only need to mark the front and the back. So let's do that. So I'm going to set my marking gauge to be the thickness of the front And I'm going to mark this on 4 sides. And that's fine. And then I'm going to set my gauge for this thickness and mark the front 2 sides of the front. So the first thing I want to mark is the half pin. The half pin is this piece on either side, and you can make it any side you want to. One consideration is if you're making a drawer, for example, where you create a slot on the inside for a drawer bottom to fit, I like to make sure this half pin is below the slot that I'm cutting, because if I cut partially into this half pin, I risk making it weak, and I could break it off when I put it all together. In this case, I'm going to make my half pin 1/4 inch. So, and I've already set this at 1/4 inch, so I'm going to mark off 1/4 there. And 1/4 here. Now with that done, I've got to mark off these 2 pins and the resulting tails. In my example, I want to have these pins evenly spaced between the 2 half pins on the outside. So there are several ways I can do that. One is I can take my square and I can measure off distances and tick off those lines. I could take a ruler, tick off the half pin lines on each side, put the 0 point here for 1, find a number on the ruler that's divisible by 3, 4.5 is divisible by 3, so that's 1.5, 3, and 4.5. Tick off the 1.5 line, the 3 line, and those will be the center points of these 2 pins. You can also do this with dividers. When you're using dividers, you're setting the divider to be the distance in total of 1 tail and 1 pin. And you're stepping this across to indicate from one side to the other the outer edge of the pin. So you step it across from this half pin to mark the outer edge going that way, and from this half pin to mark the outer edge going this way. But when you don't have an example to measure from, you've got to start from somewhere, so you have to have an estimate to start. So if you first of all set your dividers to be a dimension, that's a 1/3 of the distance in my case, because I want to have 3 full steps. 1/3 of the distance from this half pin to the outer edge, which is in this case 3 3/8. Divide that by 3 means I need to set this at 1 1/8. And then tick that off. What you'll end up with ending is right on the outside edge, and in my example, because I'm coming to the edge, all 3 will be the same size. If I open my dividers a little bit and step it off, I'll create larger tails for these 2 on the inside. And just to be clear, what you're measuring here is the size of these inner 2 pins, because I've already set these 2. Make it a little smaller, you'll create smaller inside pins. So in this example, I made them a little larger, and these pins in the middle are actually slightly larger than the ones on the outside. Let me show you how it works. Okay, I'm going to mark the half pins here. Good enough. And now with my divider, since this is 3 3/8 from the inside of this half pin to the outside of the board, I'm going to set my dividers at 1 1/8, which is 1/3 of that. And just to test that, I'm not going to press in here as 1, 2, 3, a little bit larger. 1, 2, 3, and just a tad larger still. That's good enough. So now I'm going to press down. So 1 over, press down, 2 over, press down. Then starting from the inside of this half pin, 1 over press down, 1 over, number 2 over press down. And what I've marked are the locations for these half pins in the middle. So I'm going to mark those. I'm going to mark those just outside those dots. Now I've got to put the tail lines on this. The angle that you mark this is critical. The phrase I tell myself is mark to the middle, and I start by marking the half pins. So when I put my bevel gauge on here, I want this to mark the half pin. I want it to be sloping to the middle of the board. If I mark it this way, I'm not creating a dovetail in the right direction. So marking to the middle, there's that half pin. There's that half pin. And now I just mark the others. And then mark what you're going to cut. In this case, I'm going to cut the outside here, the outside here. I'm going to cut this away. I'm going to cut this away. I'm going to cut this away. And now we're ready to cut. I'm going to set this over at a slight angle so that I'm cutting these lines straight down, then I'll move it back over to cut the other ones. So to cut, I'm using my dovetail saw, and I'm going to hold this up. I'm going to hold this right to the line. It's not important for this first cut that I'm on the line. I could be a little over, a little short. The only thing that's important is that it's straight, because once I cut this and square this, this has become the guide that marks the pins to come later. And on the back side of this, I'm holding this against my thumb to help me keep it straight. And the way I cut it is I come right on the line and I cut across the top first, get it started. And once I've started, I then come down the one side first and I follow my line coming down. And I'm trying not to cross this baseline that I've scratched on this side. And now that I'm already down to that, I'm just going to take the blade over to the other side and go down the back side. And again, I'll have to look over to make sure I don't go past the baseline. And now I'll do the rest of them. And here's the baseline right here. I put my nail right in it. Maybe hard to see on camera. And now I'm going to flip this over so I'm cutting straight down again for the other pieces. Again, right to the line. And now I've got to cut the shoulders, or the half pins. And I'm trying to, when I'm cutting on the shoulder or the half pin, I cannot go across the line. So I'm just trying to get close to the line without being over it. And I'll have to pare what's remaining, and I'll mark that so you can see that a little bit. And so I can see a little bit. I'm just making a straight down cut. And be careful not to go through this, or you'll be cutting into the tail that on the back side of the kerf there. So I've cut the lines for all the tails, and now I've got to chop them out. So I'm going to do that on the workbench here. So to do this, I'm going to use, I think, maybe this one to get started. Just a note about chisels. If you're using a wire, if you're making a bigger joint here and had the chance to use a wider chisel, you may not want to, because a larger chisel is going to have more resistance than a smaller one when you're doing this chopping of these tails and pins. So to get started, here's my baseline. I'm going to set my chisel maybe a 1/16 inch away from that edge. And I don't want to get into the tail. Actually, I'm going to use a smaller chisel just to make sure I don't. And I just make a good wrap to get started. And what happens when you're chopping with a chisel, the reason you don't want to start in the line is when you strike the chisel with the mallet, it will want to push the chisel back. And I don't want to infringe on that line until I'm ready to cut right to it. So that's why we're starting off the line. And you can see that slide a little bit when you strike it. And now I just want to chip these out. So I come to the end, I maybe have a 1/16 of an inch down from the end, and just make a light wrap, and it just flips these pieces out. So I'll go down a couple, maybe chop a little bit. And so I've gone about halfway down, and I'm going to stop there, and I'll get it from the other side in a moment. But let's get this one out first. And I could keep just lifting these pieces out, but then they would start tearing. If I chop down, I can get more of this waste out in the first flip of these pieces. Now let's do the other side. It's the same process. So here's my line. This is what I'm cutting out. I'm about a 1/16 of an inch off the line. Good wrap. I'll say that some people may use a fret saw or a coping saw to cut a lot of this waste out. But I choose not to do that because I think, as you can see, a couple of chops and a couple of chisel hits get these pieces out pretty quickly. And I've still got to get the base of it out anyway, so I just as soon chop them out. Okay, got most of it out. It's also okay if you undercut this a little bit. It doesn't matter if the center is undercut. Matter of fact, it's probably even a good thing, because you want to make sure that from this line on this side to the line on the other side is absolutely clean, because you want this tail to seat, the pins and tails to seat when they come all the way down. So that's most of the waste out. And now what I want to do is clean out what's left of here. And I'm going to do that a couple of ways. I'm going to start here and chop some of it, and then I'm going to put it in the vise and pare some of it. Just depends how much progress I make chopping. And so when I'm chopping this, I don't go all the way to that baseline first. I try to take a space halfway between it. Take off a little bit. And then I go in, put the chisel right in the line as a last step. Again, halfway to the line. And then in the line. This is why when you make this line, it needs to be scored with a strong strike to make sure you have somewhere to put this chisel. And I lean this forward when I make this last chop, trying to keep it from bouncing back into the line. So I'm undercutting that a little bit. Again, halfway to the line. And leaning the chisel forward. Halfway. Okay, that's good for now. That looks nice. I got still a little cleanup there. So to get the two half pins paired back, I'm going to put that in the vise here. Let's try it from this angle. And the way I do this, I've still got this line that I can put my fingernail in it and feel where it is. I'm going to try to trim the edges. So I'll trim this two sides and the edges to the line, and then try to clean up the rest of it down the middle. So my first step is I'm going to try to make a slicing cut here. And once you get the sides where you want them, you can just push down the middle. And I got to do a little more. And again, the important parts are the edges. If you dig the middle, that's okay. It's the edges that need to be square and flat. Okay, I think that's pretty good. And I'm happy with that. I'm close enough to the line and it's pretty square. So now let me do the other side. So the second side is the same as the first. I'm going to try to pair to the line on all four sides and then bring the middle flat. When I'm cutting these end pieces, I'm trying to be careful to slice this, and if I can slice the middle, all the better. Because if I come all the way across, I risk tearing out the fibers on the end of this board. So I've got the two sides pretty flat, and I'm just going to come down the middle and try to get the middle flat. And again, I'm trying to make a slight, when I get this thin, slicing cut will help you walk up to the line. I'm trying to be very careful not to cross the line, because this is the difference in making a crisp and tight joint and one that's not. End of the day, you can still fill the gaps. It's not the end of the world. Let's stop there. So that's square, and I'm happy with that, and I'm pretty much on the line. Now I've got to clean out these other two slots, and they're actually in pretty good shape. And I'm going to do that in a vise. What I'm trying to do here is these two outside edges need to be flat, and I need to have a clean line of sight straight from one to the other. So if I undercut this a little bit in the middle, that's perfectly fine. But I don't want to have any parts in the middle standing proud, because that will prevent the pins from seating in here fully, and it will create a gap in your joint. So I'm just going to come through in here and kind of scrape out the middle of it. And this is where I'm going to use that skew chisel. Again, you can use a sharp small knife to do this, but I'm just coming in here and chopping right up to that edge, just trying to get the rest of this waste. And you'll probably have to do this from both sides. You can't come all the way through likely, or again, you risk pushing fibers out. And you just have to take your time and do this. Another thing, when you're pushing this in, you have to be careful not to leverage this back and lean it into the tail, or you'll end up making a mark in the tail. So you got to keep the chisel just where you're trying to work, which is down here in this waist area. And again, I'm just trying to keep this flat and pushing to the line. And I could use a chisel and get some of it this way. And you can use a small chisel instead of a knife to get this stuff out. It's just a lot easier with a narrow blade like this skew chisel or knife. I can't stress enough the importance of getting these edges crisply cleaned out, because if you do not, you will leave a gap at the end. And you could do everything right and make a beautiful cut and not get a good joint because of this extra waste left in the bottom. I think we can call that okay. So I like the look of that I think it's pretty good, but let's check it for square. So I'm happy enough with that end, that's square. I'm happy enough, I think, with this side, it's square. And I need to check these tails. So that looks square, that one does, and that one does. I'm going the other way. That looks square, that looks square, and that looks square. And let's check the slope, because it may twist when I'm coming down. So the way I check the slope, I'll put my square against that, and I look for any space on either side of my square. If I can get this back on here. And that looks good, and that looks good. So let me check the rest of these. And I'll check the other side too. So again, I'm looking, is there any space there? I don't see any. There's no space there, so I'm going to call that square. So now let's cut the pins. You might want to save some of this sawdust that you're cutting because it can be useful to make a little paste and fill the gaps that you have left at the end. So this is the outside, and I'm going to put this in my vise. I'm just using this board to make a surface that I can balance the side on. And I might take another piece of wood or something to just to line the bottom up to it. So I get my tails just at the end, and I'm looking to see the lines on the pieces I've just cut are just at the edge on the inside. And this is where I'm going to use a marking knife. You could do this with a sharp pencil and it will work just fine, but I like to use a marking knife because it gives me a very precise line that I can cut to with my dovetail saw in just a moment. And with the marking knife, I'm just going to score this right up against the edge of the tail. Make a nice crisp line. Great. Set that aside, and again, mark what you're cutting. So I'm keeping the pins, but I'm cutting out this part. And now I just need to drop these lines straight down. And the pencil line straight down is just giving me a guide for my saw as I cut. Again, I cut the tails first. I'm cutting the pins second. That's just what I like to do. Some people like to cut the pins first. It's just a matter of personal preference. But I like doing this straight down cut as my second cut. You can be successful both ways. And the process of cutting is the same thing. I'm using my thumb to hold my saw straight. I'm going to start from the top, cut down one side and then the other side. In this case, I've made a very precise line, and I want to be very close to that line. You could cut this off the line a little bit and then pare the line. It just means you'll spend a lot of time paring. But this is a very good saw, and I'm confident, we'll find out later, that I can cut right to the line and minimize the paring I have to do. So again, I'm right on the line. Let's cut across the top. So now I've started. I'm going to come down one side. And then using that as a guide to come down the other side. Trying to be careful not to cross the line on the back. And if you cross the line, it's not the end of the world. Again, you can fill it up. I'm going to come across cutting this same line, and then I'll come back and do the other side. So again, right in the line. Get the top started, and holding your saw straight, come straight down one side. So that's okay, close enough. I'm a little short of the line, but I'll just chop that out. And the process of chopping out is the same as before. Cutting off this, this, and this. Now in this case, I intentionally start on the side that's wider. You can see there's more to take out on this side than that side. And that way I can lift these pieces out without interference. If I start on this side and start lifting out, I risk, as I'm tearing out the bottom pieces, damaging the sides of the tails and pins on this side. So I'm going to start on the wide side. Now this is a wider piece, and so I'm going to use a little wider chisel to get started here, but the process is the same. I'm going to come about a 1/16 of an inch off my line and make a couple of strikes. And as before, the chisel will want to slide back towards the line. It might be in a 1/16 of an off. You give yourself some cushion. And the other thing to be careful of as you chisel down into this is sloped, so I can't just keep going straight down. I've got to start angling my chop as I go down to be more of an angle from both sides. Like that. And then pop them out. Again, I could keep just chipping at ends, but it will start to tear. I think if you chop down as you go, you'll get more of it out and a cleaner finish. And it will go faster. And as before, undercutting this a little bit is just fine. Now when I did the sides, I went only about halfway through, but on this front piece, I'm going to probably go about 3/4 of the way through just because of the wider side being up. But I don't want to get too close to the back side. Okay, let's flip this over and do the other side. So in this case, the angles of the slope are going away from me, so I don't have to worry about coming in at an angle. But I need to be a 1/16 of an inch off again. And I can probably chop this through the rest of the way. Now with that out, I've got to clean this up just as I did before. So actually, I will start with do a little chopping and then we'll pare the rest of it. Leaning the chisel forward. And then I'm going to put it right in the line. And then in the line, leaning the chisel forward. And if this gets to be too small and you have a difficult time getting your chisel into it, you can also just take the chisel and pare it. Just take a little slicing motion and work your way right down to the line. You can get there anyway, just the point is to get there. And I've got a wider piece here, so I can use a little wider chisel. Halfway. And from this side again, you have to lean to avoid cutting into your tail. And then on the line. And this last one I'll just pare to the line to show you. You just make a slicing motion. Bring yourself right to the line. And let's put this in the vise to finish it up. So I don't have a lot of waste left. Shouldn't be too tough to get out. Start with our skew chisel here. And a couple of these where I didn't get the saw line all the way down, I just have to make sure I come from the top and clean that out. I'm just taking the sharp edge and just pushing it right into the tail, making a crisp corner. So I'm a little high in this middle one. Let's see what we've got. So to fit this, I just lay this over it and start trying to feel where does it fit and where does it not. And right now this end one feels like it fits pretty good. I can get it in, and this one does too. Actually, they all feel pretty good. So let's start tapping it down and see where it goes. Now when I'm tapping, as long as it's giving and going down, I'll keep going, but if it starts to stick, you can feel it. It's just not going to move anymore. But these all seem to be going down. By the way, this is a no-mar hammer. If you got a regular hammer, you might want to put a board on top. That looks pretty good. Let's plane the end of it and see if we can make it smooth. I would have certainly glued this up before I would plane it, but just to make the example today. Going back to when I marked the side and the front, I try to make my marks just a tad long, just a hair long, maybe a 64th of an inch or something trivial, because I want the pins and the tails just to be a hairline proud so that I can get a nice plane across those. And you can see my first swipe started cutting the pin. And that way I can plane the tips of these down without planing too much of the board away if I've got a particular dimension I'm trying to hold. And again, these are just slightly proud. Dovetails. Let me share one little tip for you. If you'll notice on the inside of this, you can see where I've cut out for the tails to go through here. And you'll see that in all sorts of dovetails. If you want to avoid that, if you'll cut a small rabbet on the inside of the side piece, but right here I've cut a small rabbet on the end of where I then ultimately cut the tails. And when you put that together, it makes a straight line and hides that joint, if that's important to you.